This is a work of pure fiction created entirely for entertainment purposes. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are completely fictional, and any resemblance to real persons or actual events is coincidental. Vivian Sterling looked Ethan dead in the eye across the conference table and said, "I'll pay you $50,000 to pretend to be my boyfriend for 4 days." She didn't blink, didn't apologize, just slid a folded check across the polished mahogany like she was offering a quarterly bonus and waited, because Vivian Sterling had never once in her life asked for anything twice. If this kind of story hits close to home, the quiet ones who finally get their moment, you're exactly who this channel was made for. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss what comes next, and smash the like if you want Vivian and Ethan's story to reach every corner of the world. Drop a comment telling me your city or country. I genuinely want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The offer arrived on a Tuesday, which was already a bad day. Ethan Brooks had spilled coffee on his sleeve before 7 in the morning, spent 40 minutes on a highway that was supposed to take 12, and arrived at the 32nd floor of Sterling Logistics Group with a damp cuff and the particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep. It comes from carrying too many things for too long without putting any of them down. He was a logistics operations manager. A good one, actually. The kind of employee who fixed problems before his boss knew they existed, who stayed late without announcing it, who absorbed stress the way a sponge absorbs water until one day you picked it up and it was too heavy to wring out. He'd been at Sterling Group for 4 years. In 4 years, Vivian Sterling had said his name correctly maybe 6 times. She called him Brooks, the same way someone might say the third floor or the Tuesday shipment, functional, accurate, and completely devoid of warmth. Which was why, when her assistant Priya appeared at Ethan's cubicle at 9:47 that morning and said, "Ms. Sterling would like to see you in her office," Ethan's first instinct was that he'd done something wrong. He ran through the past 2 weeks in his head while riding the elevator to the executive floor. The Midwestern distribution delay, handled. The vendor contract dispute, resolved before it became legal. The quarterly report, submitted 3 days early. Nothing. He couldn't find a thing. Vivian's office was exactly what you'd expect from a woman who had built a company worth $3 billion before she turned 42. Clean, precise, no personal photographs, no decorative plants, no indication that a human being actually spent time there. Just glass and steel and the kind of silence that told you the soundproofing was expensive. She was standing at the window when he walked in. She didn't turn around immediately. That was another thing about Vivian Sterling. She had mastered the art of making people wait in a way that never felt accidental. "Close the door," she said. He closed it. "Sit." He sat. She finally turned around. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and had her dark hair pulled back the way she always did, severe and efficient, every strand doing its job. She looked, as she always looked, like a person who had decided that the softness of her own face was a security vulnerability she couldn't afford. Ethan folded his hands and waited. Vivian sat down across from him, opened a folder, and then closed it again like she'd changed her mind. She looked at him directly. "I have a situation," she said. "Okay?" "My younger sister is getting married this weekend. The venue is in Napa Valley. 4 days. It begins Thursday evening and concludes Sunday afternoon." "Congratulations to her," Ethan said carefully. Vivian ignored this. "I need to bring someone." Another pause. "I need you to come with me," she said, "as my boyfriend." Ethan heard the sentence. He let it sit in the air for a moment, the way you let a strange noise repeat before you decide whether it's real. Your boyfriend, partner, whatever word feels appropriate. She slid the check across the desk. $50,000 for 4 days of your time. Ethan looked at the check. He didn't pick it up. "Ms. Sterling, it's a straightforward arrangement," she said. "You attend the wedding as my companion. You behave as though we are in a relationship. You do not embarrass me. You do not drink excessively. You do not say anything that contradicts whatever I say. At the end of Sunday, you return to your life and we never discuss this again." "Why me?" The question seemed to land differently than she expected. She shifted slightly in her chair, almost imperceptibly. "You're capable of maintaining composure under pressure. You're articulate. You don't make scenes. You've never had a full conversation with me." I observe people carefully, Brooks. I don't need to have dinner with someone to understand how they function. Ethan looked at the check again. $50,000. He thought about Emma, his daughter, 6 years old and growing so fast that he'd bought her new shoes twice in 3 months. He thought about the transmission in his car, which was making a sound that his mechanic had described with the kind of hesitation that precedes a significant number. He thought about the after-school program Emma's teacher had recommended, the one with the music and the art classes and the kind of structured enrichment that cost money he didn't currently have. My daughter, he said. I have a 6-year-old. I can't just disappear for 4 days. Is there someone who can look after her? That's not really the... Is there someone, Vivian repeated evenly, who can look after her? Ethan exhaled. His sister Diane lived 40 minutes away. She'd offered to take Emma last month when his schedule ran long. Emma adored Diane with the kind of uncomplicated love that only 6-year-olds were capable of. Possibly, he said. I'll double it, Vivian said. 100,000. That's my final number. Ethan stared at her. She stared back. You're serious, he said. I don't make jokes, Brooks. You've worked here 4 years. Have you ever once seen me make a joke? He hadn't. He really hadn't. Why not just, he started, why not ask someone you actually know? A friend, someone from, because everyone I know wants something from me, she said, and for just a fraction of a second something moved across her face. Not vulnerability exactly, more like a very old tiredness. The people in my personal and professional circles are all connected to each other in ways that make a story like this impossible to control. You're outside that world. You're credible. You're not going to go sell this to a gossip column. She paused. And you need the money. It wasn't cruel, the way she said it. It was just Vivian, accurate, direct, without ornamentation, which somehow made it worse. Ethan sat with it for a long moment. $100,000. He ran the numbers the way he always ran logistics numbers, automatically and quickly. Transmission, Emma's program, the savings account that had more month than money in it. His own student loans, which were technically deferred but not technically gone. I want it in writing, he said. Vivian opened the folder she'd closed earlier. Inside was a 2-page document, already printed, already waiting. She slid it across to him. He read it, all of it. She watched him read without impatience, which he noted. It was, for what it was, a fair contract. Non-disclosure, compensation schedule, behavioral expectations, exit terms. No clause that made him uncomfortable. He found that more unsettling than if there had been one. Do I get to know anything about you? He asked. If we're supposed to have been together for... How long are we supposed to have been together? I hadn't determined that yet. People are going to ask questions, Ms. Sterling. Where we met, what we do on weekends, what I know about you. Your family is going to... My family, she said, and stopped. He waited. My family is difficult, she said, with the understatement of someone describing a hurricane as some wind. My mother, particularly. She will push, she will test, she will find every crack and apply pressure to it. I need someone who doesn't break under that. And you think I won't? I think, she said, and for the first time something almost like directness entered her voice, that you've been managing impossible situations quietly for 4 years without anyone noticing how hard you were working. That's exactly what I need. Ethan picked up the pen. He signed. He called Diane from the parking garage. She what? Diane said. She offered me $100,000 to go to a wedding with her. Ethan. I know. As her fake boyfriend. As her... Yes, Diane, as her fake boyfriend. Can you please just tell me if you can take Emma for the weekend? There was a pause during which he could hear Diane processing this at high speed. Diane was a kindergarten teacher and deeply practical in the way that elementary education either created or destroyed. She had seen enough chaos that almost nothing flustered her anymore. Of course I can take Emma, she said. Emma would love it. Emma is going to absolutely lose her mind when I tell her we can make pancakes shaped like animals 3 mornings in a row. Another pause. Is this woman going to try to keep you? She's my boss, Diane. She's not... No, it's a transaction. Uh-huh. I'm serious. I know you are, Diane said. That's what worries me. Telling Emma was harder. Emma Brooks was 6 and already possessed the emotional intelligence of someone 3 times her age, which was sometimes wonderful and sometimes meant she looked at her father with those dark eyes of hers and knew when he was leaving something out. 4 whole days, she said, sitting on the kitchen counter while Ethan made pasta, because the kitchen counter was her spot and had been since she was old enough to climb up there. 4 days, and then I'll be back. Is it for work? Sort of. Emma considered this, swinging her feet. She had his feet, long, slightly too wide for most shoes. Is your boss nice? Ethan thought about Vivian Sterling looking at him across a mahogany desk with the particular expression of someone who had done the math and was simply reporting the result. She's professional, he said. That means no. Emma. Dad. I'm 6, not 3. He turned away from the stove so she wouldn't see him almost smile. She's complicated, he said. Some people are just complicated. Emma thought about this seriously, the way she thought about most things. Okay, she said finally, but bring me back something. Something good. Not a keychain. I've never brought you a keychain. I know, I'm setting a precedent. Ethan turned back to the stove and stirred the pasta with slightly unsteady hands. Vivian sent a car Thursday morning. Not a car. A car. The kind of black SUV that announced quietly, without saying anything out loud, that the person inside it did not wait for things. Things waited for them. The driver was professional and silent, and held the door open in a way that made Ethan feel faintly absurd standing there with his one medium-sized suitcase that he'd borrowed from Diane because his own had a broken wheel. He sat in the back and waited. Vivian arrived 3 minutes later in a camel coat and an expression that said the weekend had already begun, and she was already calculating the angles. She got in, looked at his suitcase, and said nothing. He appreciated that more than he expected to. For the first 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. The city fell away behind them, gray morning giving way to a thinner kind of light as they moved toward the highway. We should go over some things, Vivian said eventually, without looking away from her phone. Probably, yeah. She lowered the phone. How we met? I've been thinking a company event makes the most sense. A conference 8 months ago in San Francisco. You attended as part of the operations team. We met at the networking dinner after the first day. Was there actually a conference in San Francisco 8 months ago? Yes, the Pacific Logistics Summit. You weren't there, but 12 other employees were. If anyone checks, the event exists. You've thought this through. I think everything through, Brooks. Ethan, he said, if we're doing this, you should probably be able to say my first name without it sounding like you're reading it off a form. She looked at him then, actually looked at him, in a way she hadn't really done in her office, not this directly. He had ordinary features she'd noted before. Brown eyes, the kind of face that didn't draw attention to itself. But there was something in the steadiness of how he held her gaze that most people didn't manage. Ethan, she said. It came out flat, practiced. A word she was learning the pronunciation of. Better than nothing, he said. What do I call you? Vivian? Not in front of your family, right? Not just Vivian. She understood immediately. Viv, she said, and something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a flinch, not quite anything he could name. My father used to call me that, before he passed. I'm sorry. It was 8 years ago. She turned back to her phone. Viv is fine. Just Viv. They spent the rest of the drive building a version of themselves. How they'd talked at that networking dinner. Her, dismissive at first. Him, not put off by it, which had apparently surprised her. Their first actual date, 2 weeks later, low-key, just coffee that turned into 4 hours. The fact that they'd kept it quiet because of the professional dynamic. The specific detail that Ethan had met her at the office once on a Saturday and brought her lunch because she'd been working through a vendor crisis and hadn't eaten since morning, and that was the moment she'd understood he was different. Ethan listened to all of it and noticed how she constructed the story, efficiently, plausibly, with the right kinds of specific details that made lies feel like memories. She was good at this in a way that wasn't entirely comfortable. Your family, he said. Tell me who I'm walking into. She was quiet for a moment. My mother is Margaret Sterling. She runs the family's charitable foundation. She is, She has opinions about everything and shares all of them and has never once in her life considered that her timing might be wrong. Another pause. She's never thought I was quite right. I was never the daughter she imagined. I was too loud when I was small, and then I was too quiet, and then I was too focused on work and not focused enough on... She stopped, reorganized. She loves my sister more. That's not a complaint. It's just accurate. And the sister? Lily. She's 28. She's genuinely lovely, kind, warm, the kind of person who apologizes for things that weren't her fault and means it. I don't say that sarcastically. I actually love her. Something softened in Vivian's voice, barely, like a window opened a centimeter. I don't want this weekend to be about me. I want Lily to have her wedding. Whatever happens between my mother and me, it cannot land on Lily's weekend. Understood. Then there's Damien. The name carried weight. He felt it. Ex-fiancé, he guessed. Her jaw tightened. Damien Cross. His family and mine have been business adjacent for 20 years. My mother introduced us. We were engaged for 14 months. I ended it 2 years ago. Why? She turned and looked at him with an expression that said, the question was not unreasonable, but the answer was private. He is not someone I want to build a life with. Is he going to be at the wedding? He's the best man. She said it without emotion, the way you report a weather system. That's a situation. Yes. He's going to try to destabilize this. He will be charming and strategic and will work very hard to expose this arrangement as false, because proving me wrong has been his primary hobby for 2 years. And your mother? My mother thinks Damien and I should have worked things out. A pause. She will also be working to undermine this. Ethan looked out the window at the green hills beginning to emerge as they climbed toward Napa Valley. He thought about the money. He thought about Emma's face when he'd kissed her goodbye this morning, solemn and trusting in the way that 6-year-olds were trusting when they couldn't name their own worry yet. Vivian, he said. Viv, she corrected. Viv. He tried it. It fit, oddly, better than he expected. I need you to understand something. I'm going to hold your hand and call you by your name and tell your family the story we just built. But I'm not going to be someone I'm not. If your mother comes at you and I'm standing next to you, I'm not going to smile and nod. Is that a problem? She studied him for a long moment. What would you do instead? I'd say something. What kind of something? The kind that stops it, he said, without making a scene. Just the kind that stops it. Vivian Sterling looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read, which was unusual because most things he could read well. Whatever was in it, it wasn't nothing. Don't embarrass me, she said, and turned back to her phone. He took that as a yes. The estate was everything you'd expect from old California money that had grown into new California money without losing the taste for columns and vineyards, and the kind of landscaping that implied it had always looked exactly like this, naturally, without effort. The wedding party was already assembled when they arrived. Valets, staff in white shirts, the kind of floral arrangement at the entrance that cost more than Ethan's car. They got out together. Vivian's posture changed almost imperceptibly the moment her feet hit the gravel. Straightened, closed, the way a house looks when you lock the windows before a storm. Ethan came around the car and, without overthinking it, put his hand lightly at the small of her back. She went very still for a single second. Then she kept walking. A woman in a pale blue wrap dress was coming down the front steps before they reached the entrance. She had Vivian's cheekbones, but everything else was different. The way she moved, open and eager, her whole face already arranged in warmth. Viv, she said, and threw her arms around Vivian Sterling with the kind of abandon that said she'd done this her whole life and didn't care who saw. For just a moment, something cracked in Vivian's careful exterior. She hugged her sister back, actually hugged her, arms all the way around, and if Ethan hadn't been watching closely, he'd have missed how tightly she held on. Lily, she said against her sister's hair. One word. The same word she'd said 20 minutes ago in the car, matter-of-fact and precise, but completely different now. Lily pulled back and grabbed both of Vivian's hands, and then looked at Ethan with the specific joy of someone who had been hoping something like this would happen. This is Ethan, Vivian said, and even now, even here, her voice was measured, but she said his first name, without being reminded. Ethan, Lily beamed and stuck out her hand. I've heard almost nothing about you, which with Vivian means you're either very important or very secret, and I've decided it's both. He shook her hand. He liked her immediately, the way you sometimes like people in the first 30 seconds, because their warmth was just what it appeared to be. No performance underneath it. Congratulations, he said. Big weekend. The biggest. I'm a mess. She said it happily, like being a mess was an achievement. Mom is mom. Don't let her scare you. She's actually, okay, she's a little scary, but she means well mostly. She squeezed Vivian's hand. Come on. Everyone's inside. Vivian didn't move immediately. She looked at Ethan just briefly, and he couldn't tell if it was a question or a warning or something in between. He fell into step beside her. Inside the main hall, Margaret Sterling stood at the far end of the room. She was small, which Ethan hadn't expected. Vivian was tall and Margaret was not, but the room arranged itself around her anyway in that particular way that rooms did when a certain kind of person entered them. She was in her late 60s, patrician, with the kind of posture that was not performed but installed, put there so long ago it had become structure. She looked at Vivian the way you look at a report you've read before and found disappointing. Then she looked at Ethan. Her expression did not change, but her eyes moved across him in a single, comprehensive professional assessment that told him in no uncertain terms that she was cataloging everything. His suit, good, not exceptional. His shoes, acceptable. His build, neither here nor there. The precise distance between him and her daughter, close, deliberate. And the expression on his face, which he made sure was calm, open, and completely unintimidated. Vivian, Margaret said. Mother, Vivian said. They embraced in the way that some mothers and daughters embrace. Technically correct, duration appropriate, achieving the form of warmth without any of the heat. And this, Margaret said, releasing Vivian and turning to Ethan with a smile that was perfectly executed, must be the man we've all been waiting to meet. Ethan Brooks, he said, and extended his hand. It's a pleasure, Mrs. Sterling. She shook it once, firmly, held it a beat too long. I understand you work for Vivian's company. I do, yes. Interesting. She released his hand and turned back to her daughter. You'll have to tell me how that dynamic works. She said it lightly, the way you drop something sharp into water and listen for the sound it makes when it lands. Ethan smiled. Pretty well so far, he said, and put his hand back at Vivian's side. Comfortable, easy, like he'd done it 100 times. Vivian, for her part, stood exactly as she always stood. But something in her exhale was, very slightly, less controlled than usual. Across the room, near the bar, a tall man in an expensive suit turned to look at them. And even from 40 feet away, the particular quality of his attention was immediately clear. Damien Cross raised his glass toward Vivian with a slow, deliberate smile. Not a greeting. Something much more like the opening move of a game he intended to win. Ethan felt Vivian's shoulder, barely touching his, go rigid for just a moment. He didn't look at Damien, he looked at Vivian. You okay? He said quietly. Just for her. A pause. Long enough to mean something. Yes, she said, and then with an effort that was almost invisible. Ethan. His name again. On her own, again. He decided that was enough for now. Damien Cross made his first move before dinner. Ethan had gone to the room, their room, one room, which he'd registered without comment when the staff handed them a single key card, to change into the jacket Vivian had told him, very specifically and with a list, to bring. He'd been gone maybe 25 minutes. When he came back down the main staircase and crossed toward the pre-dinner gathering on the terrace, he found Vivian standing near the edge of the group with a glass of white wine she hadn't touched, and Damien Cross standing just slightly too close to her, speaking at a volume designed to be intimate without being private. Ethan didn't rush. He crossed the terrace at a normal pace, accepted a glass from a passing server, and came to stand beside Vivian with the easy, unremarkable confidence of someone who had been standing beside her for 8 months. Was only saying, Damien was finishing, with the particular smoothness of a man who had rehearsed sounding unrehearsed, that it's good to see you looking well. The last 2 years have obviously agreed with you. Damien, Ethan said, extending his free hand before Vivian had to respond to anything. Ethan Brooks. Congratulations on being best man. That's a big responsibility. Damien looked at him. The assessment was immediate and surgical, the kind that came from a lifetime of knowing exactly who was and wasn't in his league. He shook Ethan's hand with controlled pressure. Yes. Marcus and I go back a long way. A pause. And you and Vivian, how long has it been now? She's been very private about all of this. 8 months, Vivian said. 8 months. Damien repeated it the way you repeat a number you're running calculations on. That's funny. You didn't mention anyone at the Henderson Gala in February. I don't discuss my personal life at business events, Damien. You know that. Of course. He smiled. It was a good smile, technically. The problem with it was that it never quite reached far enough back in his eyes. I suppose I just would have expected, after everything, that you might have mentioned it. To mutual friends, at least. We keep things quiet, Ethan said. Her preference, not mine. Personally, I'd have taken out a billboard. He said it simply, with the tone of a man reporting a mild marital frustration, and took a relaxed sip of his drink. Vivian glanced at him sideways with an expression that was not in any of their agreed-upon scripts, but that looked to anyone watching almost exactly like the look a woman gives a man who just said something both accurate and slightly embarrassing. Damien absorbed this. He smiled again, thinner this time. Well, we'll have plenty of time to get to know each other properly. He lifted his own glass toward Ethan, not a toast, just an acknowledgement, the kind that meant I see you and we're not done, and drifted back toward the main group. Vivian waited until he was gone, then said, quietly and without looking at Ethan, a billboard. It landed. It was excessive. You're still holding your wine glass like you're about to throw it at someone. I needed to redirect the energy. She looked down at her hand. She was, in fact, gripping the stem with more structural intention than was strictly necessary for drinking wine. She loosened her fingers. Fine, she said. It landed. Dinner was a long table under Edison lights strung between oak trees, which was the kind of setting that looked effortless and cost a fortune. Lily had placed Vivian and Ethan together, naturally, across from Margaret and her companion for the weekend, a pleasant, quiet man named Gerald, who seemed to have made peace with the role of attending functions in Margaret Sterling's orbit and expressing no strong opinions about anything. Lily sat at the head with her fiancé Marcus, who was warm and genuine and had the particular quality of a man who genuinely loved the person he was marrying and didn't need anyone to know it because he already knew it. Ethan liked him immediately, the way he'd liked Lily. He found himself thinking, briefly and without meaning to, that they were going to be fine. Those two were actually going to be fine. Margaret, across the table, was engaged in what appeared to be a pleasant conversation with Gerald, but was, Ethan quickly understood, a parallel operation. She could conduct full diplomatic relations with Gerald while simultaneously running surveillance on her daughter's table behavior, her daughter's companion's table behavior, the precise number of times her daughter's companion's hand came close to her daughter's, and the overall quality of their interaction as data points in a hypothesis Margaret was still constructing. Brooks, Margaret said, during a natural pause, without preamble. That's what? Originally? English? Somewhere back there, probably, Ethan said. My family's been American long enough that nobody remembers the original combination with any confidence. And where did you grow up? Ohio, Columbus. And your parents? My father worked for a trucking company for 30 years. My mother was a school librarian. He said it without apology, without decoration. Just the facts, plainly, in a way that preempted any follow-up that might try to dress the facts in something other than what they were. Margaret nodded. And your daughter, she said. Vivian mentioned you have a daughter. Vivian had mentioned this, apparently, at some point before the weekend. Ethan filed that away. Emma, he said. She's 6. And her mother? Margaret, Vivian said. I'm only asking because it's relevant context when her mother isn't in the picture, Ethan said evenly. It's been Emma and me for about 4 years now. She's doing well. He picked up his fork. She's got very strong opinions about pancake shapes. Across the table, Margaret Sterling recalibrated. It was minor, the recalibration. A small shift in the set of her shoulders. A barely perceptible reassessment. She had been, he understood, expecting either defensiveness or evasion, and he'd given her neither. Gerald, who had been quiet through all of this, said, How old did you say? 6? and smiled in the uncomplicated way of a man who liked children and didn't have any political agenda around the topic, and the conversation opened slightly into something that didn't have knives in it. Vivian, next to him, unfolded a little. Almost. She reached for her wine, and her hand passed close to his on the table, and it was such a small, incidental thing, but he put his hand near enough that their fingers touched briefly, and he felt her go still for a half-second and then just continue. Like it hadn't happened. Like it had. Later after dinner, when most of the family had migrated inside, Ethan stood on the edge of the terrace and looked out at the vineyard. The rows of vines went back a long way in the dark, orderly and patient, doing whatever it was vines did at night. He called Diane. "She's asleep," Diane said immediately, which meant Emma was asleep, and also meant Diane had been waiting for him to call. "We made elephant pancakes." Emma ate 2.5 and declared the half a failed experiment. "That tracks." "How is it?" He considered the question. The Edison lights behind him, the table they'd just left, Damian Cross's precise and calibrated smile, Margaret Sterling's comprehensive scan, and Vivian's hand loosening around a wine glass because he'd said something that landed. "It's a lot," he said. "Is she awful, the boss?" No, she's not awful," he paused. "She's somebody who spent a really long time being very defended and isn't sure how to be anything else." Diane was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like something a person says when they've already started caring about someone." "Diane, I'm just noting." "Emma okay? Really?" "Emma is perfect. Emma is asleep in my guest room with 3 stuffed animals and one of your old t-shirts she apparently snuck into her bag because it smells like you, which she told me with complete matter-of-factness and zero embarrassment." Ethan closed his eyes for a second. "Okay," he said. "Good." "Ethan." Diane's voice shifted, gentler. "Be careful. Not with the job stuff. With you." He didn't answer that right away. The vineyard was very dark and very quiet, and above the hills the stars were doing what stars did in places without too much light pollution, which was to say they were everywhere. "Get some sleep," he said. "You too. Good luck tomorrow." He found Vivian on the small balcony off their room, still in her dinner clothes, arms folded against the cool air that came off the valley at night. He'd half expected her to be working, phone in hand, scrolling through something, reverting to the Vivian Sterling he knew from the 32nd floor. Instead, she was just standing there, looking at nothing in particular. "Room's not bad," he said, coming to stand near her. He kept a few feet of space. The room itself had a king bed and a small sofa that he'd mentally claimed without making it a discussion, because it didn't need to be a discussion. "My mother booked us here," Vivian said. "She doesn't miss details. 1 room, 1 bed, pressure test. Everything with my mother is a pressure test." She paused. "You handled dinner well. Your mother's not the worst person I've ever navigated." "No, that's Damian." She said it without heat, just fact. "What did he actually do?" Ethan asked. "You don't have to tell me, but if he's going to keep coming at this, it would help to understand the shape of it." Vivian was quiet for long enough that he thought she'd decided not to. Then she said, "We were engaged. 14 months. I planned to marry him, which in retrospect was—" She stopped. "I'm not someone who doesn't know what she's doing. I'm not careless, but I was 39 and the company was at a particular inflection point, and my mother was—" Another stop. "I confused being practical about a relationship for being clear-eyed about it." "What happened?" "I found out he'd spoken to 2 of my board members, privately, about my fitness to lead through a potential merger. He framed it as concern. It was positioning." A pause. "He wanted to marry the company. I was the mechanism." Ethan looked at her profile in the dark. She was saying it the way she said most things. Measured, contained, the way you talk about something after you've had enough time to drain most of the feeling out of it. But the feeling wasn't entirely gone. It was still in the particular flatness of her voice, the way people go flat when they're covering something they don't want to be visible. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be. I should have seen it. Being deceived by someone who was specifically trying to deceive you isn't a personal failure." She turned and looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. It wasn't quite discomfort, and it wasn't quite surprise. It was more like the look of someone who's heard a sentence that doesn't fit into any existing category and is not sure what folder to put it in.
You say things like that, she said, like they're obvious. They are obvious. To you, maybe. A wind moved through the valley below them, cool and carrying the smell of earth and something green. Vivian turned back to look out at it. My mother told me once, she said, that I had always been the kind of girl who would rather be impressive than loved. She meant it as a criticism, but I took it as a strategy. She paused. That was probably not healthy. Probably not, he agreed. You're not supposed to just agree with that. You said probably not healthy. It's probably not healthy. I'm agreeing with you. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to one. You're strange, she said. I'm tired, he said. And you're cold. Go inside. She looked at him. You sound like... She stopped. Like what? She shook her head, a small movement, and went inside without finishing the sentence.
He stood on the balcony a little longer. The vines in the dark. The stars. Emma's old t-shirt in Diane's guest room. He was not going to think too hard about what she'd been about to say. Friday was the rehearsal day, which meant hours of structured family time across a schedule that Lily had organized with the enthusiasm of someone who had been imagining this exact weekend for years. There was a morning wine tasting, optional, but in a house where Margaret Sterling was a guest, optional meant expected, followed by a family lunch, a rehearsal at the Vineyard Chapel in the afternoon, and a dinner that was smaller than the night before but considerably more personal. More personal was, for Ethan's purposes, more complicated. The wine tasting was held in the estate's barrel room, which was cool and dim and smelled of oak and concentrated sweetness. Someone had set up long tables with glasses already poured, labeled in chalk. The kind of thing that took real planning and looked like it hadn't. Damien found Ethan at the second table, where Ethan had drifted while Vivian was pulled into conversation by one of Lily's bridesmaids who appeared to genuinely adore her in a way Vivian clearly didn't know how to receive. Good morning, Damien said, landing beside him with the fluid ease of a man entirely comfortable taking up space. Morning, Ethan said. Damien picked up a glass, examined it. Pinot Noir, this region does it well. He took a sip. How long have you been in logistics? 4 years at Sterling. Before that, I was at a regional freight company in the Midwest. And before that? School, Army, briefly, then school again. Damien absorbed this like someone logging information for later. Army, he said. Interesting. Not particularly. No, I mean... Damien set his glass down. I mean, it's interesting that Vivian chose someone so different from her usual, from the people she typically gravitates toward. You mean from people like you? Damien smiled. I didn't say that. You were building toward it. Ethan picked up the next glass on the table. You want to know if I'm real? I get it. I'd wonder the same thing if I were you. Would you? Sure. Your ex-fiancée shows up to her sister's wedding with someone no one's ever heard of, someone from inside the company, someone who's, what's the word you're running? Out of her league, not the right fit, doesn't belong in this room? He said it without heat, just laying it out. I'd ask questions too. Damien was quiet for a moment. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this particular register. You're direct, he said. I have a 6-year-old at home, Ethan said. Direct saves time. And Vivian doesn't mind that? The directness? She minds everything, initially. Then she decides whether it's useful. He glanced across the room to where Vivian was nodding at something Lily's bridesmaid was saying, not entirely comfortable, but not retreating either. She's more flexible than she looks. Damien followed his gaze. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of recalculation. She doesn't let people in, he said, and for just a moment the strategy dropped out of it. He said it like a man who had spent 14 months running into walls. She keeps everything at a distance and calls it privacy. That's not my experience, Ethan said. Damien looked at him sharply. She talks, Ethan said. You just have to not make it feel like a deposition. Another silence. Damien picked up his glass again. The strategy came back. You could see it slide back into place, efficient as a lock closing. Well, he said, I hope it's everything you think it is. He moved away back toward the other end of the table. Ethan let out a slow breath through his nose and tried the Pinot Noir. It was good. He wasn't really a wine person, but it was good. Mom Chin. Vivian appeared at his side within 3 minutes. She had clearly been watching. "What did he say?" she asked, without greeting. "Nothing dangerous. He's feeling me out. He'll escalate." "I know. He's not finished." Ethan turned toward her. "I told him you talk, that you just need people to not make it feel like a deposition." She stared at him. "You told him. Why would you tell him that?" "Because it's true and because it threw him. He expected me to be defensive or evasive, and instead I said something real about you, and now he doesn't know if what we built is fake or not." He shrugged one shoulder. "That's the best camouflage we have. The true things." Vivian looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the barrel room murmured with conversation and the careful sound of wine being discussed by people who took wine seriously. "You're better at this than I expected," she said. "You expected bad?" "I expected adequate. High praise." "For me, yes." She picked up a glass from the table, a white this time, and finally took a sip that wasn't a prop. "My mother watched you talk to Damien." "I assumed. She hasn't made a comment yet. That's unusual for her. It means she's still gathering data." "She'll say something at lunch." "Probably." Vivian looked into her glass. "She always waits until a meal to say the hard things. Public enough that you can't respond fully, contained enough that it doesn't become a scene." "I'll be ready." "Ethan." She said his name with more weight than she usually carried it. "I don't want you to... I'm not asking you to fight my battles. I'm asking you to be present. Those aren't the same thing." He thought about that for a second. "Okay," he said. "What's the difference to you?" She seemed surprised he'd asked. She turned her glass in her hand slowly. "Fighting implies I need rescuing. Being present implies I'm not alone in the room." "Got it," he said. "I can do present." Something moved across her face, quick and unguarded, the way something sometimes appears in a window before the curtain is pulled. Then it was gone, and she was looking at the white wine again. "It's a Chardonnay," she said. "This region doesn't do Chardonnay as well as the Pinot." "Good to know," he said, and let her have the subject change. Lunch was, as she'd predicted, where Margaret chose to deploy her real material. They were seated in the main dining room now, the full family configuration, Lily at the center of it all, and radiantly happy in the careless way of people who are so fully inside a good thing they haven't started being afraid of it yet. Marcus's family occupied one end of the table, warm, large, 3 generations of people who all seemed to actually like each other, which Ethan found quietly staggering. Margaret sat beside Vivian. Ethan was on Vivian's other side. For the first 40 minutes, Margaret was perfectly civilized. She asked Marcus's mother about her garden. She complimented the food. She was, in every visible way, a woman enjoying her younger daughter's wedding week. Then, in the way that a change in wind direction changes without announcement, she turned to Vivian and said, "I spoke with Dr. Hendricks last week. He asked after you." "Dr. Hendricks?" Ethan cataloged the name without knowing its significance yet. "That's nice," Vivian said. "He's consulting for the Baxter Foundation now. Very impressive work." Margaret cut a piece of food with precision. "He mentioned he'd reached out and hadn't heard back." "I've been busy." "You're always busy, darling," said with affection that had something else folded inside it. "He's a good man, well established. He understood your world." The briefest, most calibrated glance at Ethan, there and gone. Ethan ate his food. "Marcus," Lily said loudly and with magnificent timing from across the table, "tell them about the honeymoon. Tell them the whole thing." Marcus, who either had no idea what had just passed at the other end of the table or was more perceptive than he looked, launched into the honeymoon story with genuine enthusiasm, and the table's attention shifted. Under the table, without planning it, Ethan moved his hand and covered Vivian's where it rested on her leg. Just once. Just briefly. Not a performance, because there was no one watching under the table. She went very still. Then, slowly, she turned her hand over. Not holding his, just open, like she was deciding. He didn't move his hand, she didn't move hers. They sat like that through most of Marcus's honeymoon story, which was apparently going to involve 2 weeks in Portugal and a fishing boat and someone's grandmother who spoke no English and was absolutely wonderful, and the table laughed in the right places. Margaret, Ethan noted without looking directly at her, was not looking at the honeymoon story. She was looking at her daughter's hand. The rehearsal was held at 4 o'clock in a small chapel at the edge of the property where 2 old oak trees framed the entrance in a way that looked almost planned. Lily had tears in her eyes during the run-through, which made Marcus reach over and squeeze her hand, and a bridesmaid near Ethan made a sound that was not quite a sob, but was adjacent to one. Ethan stood at the back with the other non-participating partners and watched, and thought about Emma again without choosing to. About the way she sometimes climbed into his lap while he was trying to read something and just sat there, not asking for anything, just choosing his vicinity. About how that was its own thing, being someone's chosen vicinity. After the rehearsal, while Lily was taking photographs with her bridal party in the last of the afternoon light, Vivian found a bench away from the main group near the base of one of the oak trees and sat down. She had her phone out, but she wasn't looking at it. Ethan sat beside her, not close, just beside. "You were going to say something last night," he said. "On the balcony. You stopped." She was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't important." "Okay." Another silence. A bird somewhere above them in the oak tree made a short, irritated sound, and then was quiet. "You sound like my father did," she said finally. "When you tell me things like being deceived isn't a personal failure, he used to say things like that, plain things, like they were just obvious and he couldn't understand why you dressed them up differently." Ethan didn't say anything. "He died 8 years ago. Heart attack. Very fast." She said it in the flat way of something practiced. "He was the only person in my family who thought my ambition was a feature rather than a flaw. My mother thought it made me too hard to be around. Damien thought it made me useful." A pause. "My father thought it was just me, part of the design." The afternoon light was going golden through the oak leaves above them, the kind of light that made everything look a little more significant than it actually was, or maybe just revealed the significance that was already there. "He sounds like he was a good person," Ethan said. "He was." She looked at her phone, not at the screen. "He would have liked you, I think. He liked people who didn't perform." Ethan thought about that for a moment. About a woman who had built $3 billion of company partly because she was trying to become something that deserved to be loved, and who had never quite been told, by the people who should have said it, that the deserving part had never been in question. He didn't say any of that out loud. "Come on," he said, and stood. "Lily's going to want people in the photos whether you're ready or not." Vivian looked up at him, and in the gold light under the oak tree her face was briefly, entirely unguarded. No calculation in it, no performance, no 32nd floor armor. Just a woman sitting on a bench who was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I'm not photogenic," she said. "Vivian, I mean it. I always look—" "Get up," he said, and extended his hand. She looked at his hand. She took it and let him pull her to her feet, and they walked back toward the light and the photographs and Lily's uncomplicated joy, and she didn't let go of his hand until they reached the edge of the group. He noticed that she let go last. He noticed she didn't seem to notice that she had. The wedding was on Saturday. Lily had chosen late afternoon for the ceremony, the kind of hour when California light went from gold to something almost amber, when the shadows grew long and soft, and everything looked like it was being remembered rather than experienced. The chapel with its 2 oak trees was full by 4 o'clock. 60 people, which was small by Sterling family standards, intimate by design, because Lily had insisted and Margaret had eventually, visibly, accepted this as one of the negotiations she'd decided to lose. Ethan sat in the second row on the bride's side, because Vivian was standing up near the altar. Not as a bridesmaid. She'd told him that on the drive up, that Lily had asked and Vivian had declined because standing in photographs for 2 hours in matching dresses was not something she was built for, and Lily had said she understood while clearly hoping she might change her mind. She hadn't changed her mind, but she'd agreed to do the first reading, which was a passage from a Pablo Neruda poem that Lily had loved since college, and watching Vivian Sterling stand at a wooden podium in a slate-gray dress and read Neruda aloud to 60 people was something Ethan had not adequately prepared himself for. She read it without performance. That was the thing. No affect, no theatrical pause, no attempt to make it more than it was. Just the words, clearly, at a pace that let them land. Her voice was steady and low, and it filled the small chapel without effort. And about halfway through, Lily, seated beside Marcus at the altar, started crying, and Marcus put his hand over hers, and the whole room felt it. Ethan felt it. He sat with his hands on his knees and looked at the woman he'd driven to Napa Valley on a contractual arrangement and thought, with the particular inconvenience of an honest thought, that he hadn't expected any of this. Any part of it. Not the balcony conversation or the bench under the oak tree or the way she'd let go of his hand last when they'd walked back into the light. He'd expected an assignment. He'd expected to be useful and then return to his regularly scheduled life. He hadn't expected to understand her. That was the part that was going to be a problem. The ceremony was 25 minutes. Marcus cried, which Ethan respected. Lily laughed through her vows, the specific laugh of someone who is so completely inside happiness that the body doesn't know what to do with it and defaults to laughing, and it was the most genuine thing Ethan had witnessed in years. The officiant was a friend of theirs who'd gotten ordained for the occasion and who kept the whole thing moving with warmth.